Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This actually didn't happen to me. It is a story that happened to my aunt back when she was in her mid-20s, and I'm going to say that it's an incredibly intense story, and this should definitely serve as a type of trigger warning. And like I said, she was in her mid-20s, and this happened back in the late 80s, a few years after I was born. Unfortunately, all of this had been told to me as I was just a baby when it happened, so I may miss some of the details, but I don't think it diminishes the overall story. This story happened while they were still married, but he is her ex-husband now, so I think it counts. My aunt and uncle met back when they were in high school, and they became a couple back when they were about 18. From there, they got married at the age of 22, and then were trying to have a kid, but come to find out, my uncle was sterile and they couldn't have kids. From what I've been told, this caused some problems between them, and they were on the edge of divorce, but they decided to go into counseling to try and fix it. From there, they supposedly got to a point where they were okay and things were essentially repaired. This was apparently not true at all. They were actually in a worse situation than before. Apparently, when they went to counseling, my aunt's husband started down the path of becoming super religious. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with being religious, he took it to a whole other level. He apparently became super controlling over my aunt and started making her go to church with him and start cutting the family out of her life. It hit the point where she told us that they were doing great together and that we didn't need to worry about her. But on the other side of that fence, he was abusive, controlling, and just genuinely doing whatever he could to ruin her life and make her miserable. She said that it started with him telling her that she needed to repent and beg forgiveness from Jesus. She said that she was okay with this and saw that maybe devotion to a higher power would be enough to keep them together. She started going to his church, she started praying nightly with him, and they started doing nightly Bible reads. Slowly, the controlling behavior started digging in. He started telling her what she could and could not eat. He started telling her that she wasn't allowed to leave without his permission. And after a while, he started controlling the music that she could listen to and what TV shows she could watch. Basically, anything that was violent, sexual, or had inappropriate language was banned from their house. Her husband literally hit a point where he was treating her like a child and running every single minute of her life. This would be bad enough, but things actually started getting worse with him. After he was at a point where controlling her wasn't enough, he started physically abusing her when she got out of line. All the while, he would be citing biblical scripture to her about things that were barely relevant. The big thing that happened between them actually happened about a year into all of this. My aunt had managed to get away from him for a little while. I had no idea how and spoke with a lawyer. She was able to get the paperwork started for them to get a divorce, and she brought it to him and told him that she wanted out of their relationship. While I commend her for being bold and standing up to him in this situation, it's not something that typically goes well with dealing with an abuser, and this did not go well. As soon as my aunt started talking about divorce, he started screaming at her about the sanctity of marriage and yelling about how her asking for a divorce was a literal slap in the face of Jesus. She told him that his abusive behavior was the exact opposite of what a true follower of his religion would have been doing. And then he went berserk. He went off on her, asking her how she could dare call him a blasphemer. And at that point he snapped. He started saying something about how she was possessed by Satan. He started telling her that the devil was using her to attack him, and that her inability to have a child, even though it was him that was sterile, was proof that she was nothing more than a puppet for the demons. He then grabbed a knife and then told her that he had no choice but to kill her in order to prove his love to Jesus. That night, that man stabbed my aunt 7 times. He used the kitchen knife and stabbed her over and over until he was sure that she was dead. Then he left her to bleed out. And fortunately, my aunt was way more of a fighter than he anticipated, and she had managed to actually survive the attack. She managed to knock the phone off the base that was in the kitchen, and she dialed 911, and by some modern medical miracle, she made it through. As for him, the cops actually arrested him in a church, apparently after he attempted to murder his wife with multiple stab wounds, and thinking that he had succeeded, he drove to the church that they attended, covered in blood, and asked the priest to say a prayer for him. Instead of sitting and praying with him, he called the cops. It's almost ironic that he tried to kill my aunt because Jesus wanted him to, and she survived. Then he went to a church, only for the religious figurehead to betray him and turn him into the police. It almost like attempted murder for your spouse isn't something that Jesus or really any deity would want you to do. And that's an absolutely crazy hell way to think. My aunt fully recovered. She does have some gnarly scars on her stomach and chest now. But I'm just grateful that she made it, and that this guy is in prison for the rest of his life. Maybe someone out there really was watching the situation and made sure that it went the way that it actually was supposed to. As a child, I was raised in a small tight-knit town. I hated it. Everyone knew you, and there was no such thing as a secret. If you tell one person, you will hear it from someone else in 2 days tops. I had a group of 4 or 5 friends max that I might share things with that I could actually trust. Hell, some things I couldn't even tell my little sister without getting something on her. Otherwise, we just use it as leverage on each other. And that's what makes the situation even crazier to me. Our school classes were pretty normal, in curriculum and in size in my opinion. We had maybe 10 or 15 of us in a classroom. No one outside of our town was interested in going to our school, and as soon as they were given the opportunity, kids in high school that had cars would get to choose to go to school outside of our district to get out of here, or people would move out before then. I was not so lucky. My family was far from wealthy, so we stayed in our town till I was old enough to move out. Anyways, back to the classes. Obviously, being a teenager, relationships are bound to happen. They weren't many to choose from, and some may have even been a year younger or older than you. I dated a few different girls there, but there was one I was with for about 2 years. For privacy reasons, I'll call her Macy. From the outside, Macy was a fun girl to be around. She was tall, about shoulder-length dark hair, and dark brown eyes with freckles. She could talk to anyone. She was definitely outgoing, and I never really saw a mean side to her. I think she would strive to be everyone's friend. She was just part of our group of friends for the longest time. She wore makeup and dressed more feminine, but also loved going down by the river with me and my friends to catch things, destroy things, and maybe enjoy some drinking. It was over the summer that I really got to know her more. I knew her dad was a drunk and her mom worked a lot, so she didn't see them much. She came over to our house a lot for dinner and sometimes even slept in our living room. There was one time that she had gotten into an argument with her father. He had grabbed her and started choking her when her mother finally convinced him to let her go, but her mother told her that it was best for her to leave for a while. She came over in tears and I helped her calm down, and I think that really solidified our relationship in a weird way. I was angry. My parents weren't perfect, but they would never hurt us kids. How could a parent do that to their own kid? It was worse when the cops showed up and did absolutely nothing. They showed up to their house, took him in. He said he was sorry and was able to come home after sobering up. Like that changed anything though. She practically lived with us at times. She slept on the couch. Sometimes she'd fall asleep in my room and I'd sleep in the living room. We acted like a normal couple for the most part, hanging out with friends together, always walking to class together, things like that. But after a while, I started seeing a different side of her. I noticed some of the smallest things would set her off. If a friend teased her about something, like throwing a ball weird, and I didn't immediately defend her, she would be pissed. It started as her just ignoring me for the rest of the night. Then she would complain to me in private about how she was embarrassed. But then it started to become more public. She would call me out in front of our friends and even my parents and then storm off. This was my first real relationship, so I didn't really know how to react to it. I would go through the motions, apologize and make up, and we'd be fine. However, it always seemed to get worse. The more serious fights would happen when it was just us. She'd kick things, punch things, scream if she could, and sometimes she would even hit me. It was actually just punching me in the chest or smacking me in the face, but it was still unusual. I thought surely it had to do with her father being the person he was. Maybe this was what she did because she was used to it. So I would do what I could to calm her down, but it stopped working after a while. I would have to lock her out of my room or I would leave until she calmed down, but of course, that's when the accusations would fly. She would start getting loud and push me while at school, and it was embarrassing for me at that point, so I would just walk away. For some reason, when I did this, she thought that I was trying to hide from my other girlfriend. She started accusing me of cheating on her, and she'd always show up at the door of my classroom and wait to see if I walked out with another girl. We had a group project in one of my classes, and I was paired with my friend, Jeff, and some girl that I didn't know too well. And when I was leaving the room, she punched me in the face and started saying that she finally caught me. I remember the girl just looking horrified as she tried leaving without Macy noticing her. People were starting to gather, but she had her eyes locked on and jumped on the girl's back and started slamming her around. I managed to get her off of the girl and told her that we were done. I remember that I called her psycho or something equally hurtful because the look in her eyes changed to sorrow, and she ran off. I, of course, got called to the office and had to explain what happened. Macy ended up being expelled, and I told them it was my fault, hoping that the other girl didn't get any trouble. And I ended up being suspended for the quarter. I finished my suspension, and as awkward as it was, I returned to school to be the center of discussion for everyone. I didn't get to hear much on what happened to Macy, except for what my friends knew, which wasn't much, until I returned. I heard her parents were forced to put her in therapy, and possibly some kind of school for troubled teens, but I never saw her again. That happened about 18 years ago. Right after high school, I left that town. I wanted to go somewhere that was a lot more alive and meet people that I hadn't known my whole life. My sister and I even inspired our parents to get out of there a few years ago. However, they still surprise me with the amount of information, news, and gossip they tell me about people that live there. That's where it gets crazy. Around the time of our 10-year high school reunion, people started trying to contact me about getting together. I thought, why the hell not? And I decided to start making plans to visit. However, a few weeks after that, I got a frantic call from my mother late at night telling me that there had been a fire in our old town. She told me it was Macy's house, and the terrifying part, her parents died in the fire. My father was good friends with one of the cops there, and he had told them that Macy was still living there on and off, but she was working the night it happened, and they had to go pick her up. After the investigation, they had determined that her dad had passed out with a cigarette. He was blitzed, of course, and her mom had actually taken sleeping pills. It was just a bad situation, and I felt sorry for her. I almost wanted to reach out to her, maybe to at least give my condolences, but something told me not to. My mother went to the services, and she said Macy was just a shell. She just sat in the front pew staring straight ahead until the services ended. Afterwards, she said she was nowhere to be found, so my mother left her card with the other items and left. After that, I never heard about Macy or her life until last year. This time, my friend actually texted me and sent me a link to a local news for our old town. It started as a suspicious fire. Police were called to an old barn that was on fire behind one of the bars. Someone apparently walked out back, smelled the smoke, saw the flames between the trees that separated the property, and then called 911. After they put out the fire, they found a man's body in there. He had been stabbed multiple times, bludgeoned with a shovel, and doused in some kind of oil and set on fire. They couldn't ID the guy because he didn't have anything on him. That was crazy enough, right? Not at all. Not for that place. Rumors started flying pretty quickly. People started talking, but not to the police, but that didn't stop them from finding out. That's when my friend started filling in the blanks where the story left off. He still lives there. He actually took over his parents' drugstore, so he gets just as much information. The guy ended up being identified as the owner of the bar. They figured this out because his wallet was found in the dumpster at his bar, but his cash was missing. Coincidentally, someone showed up at a different bar, flaunting cash and buying everyone drinks, saying it was in this guy's honor. Thing is, they hadn't publicly announced this guy's identity, so the police took notice of this. The girl was picked up and questioned when she finally confessed to the murder. And you know where this is going. It was Macy. She was apparently dating the owner, or at least there was something going on between them. However, he was married. Rumors are that the wife found out and the owner tried to break it off with Macy, and she wasn't having it. And now that she is locked up for this, the rumors are coming back that she may have been involved in her parents' death. So, not only did I date a not-so-stable girl in high school, but she turned out to be a murderer. So I guess I got lucky at that time. But it does make me think what could have happened if I did reach out to her when her parents passed. What if we didn't move? Could I have been a victim? I also think if this was related to her childhood, and if that could have made a difference as well. One thing I told my friend though, is that he'll have to come to see me from now on, because I do not want to step back in that place. This story happened to me back when I was in college. I would have been around 21, I believe, which means that it would have been around 2010. And back then, I used to be a bit socially awkward. Okay, really socially awkward. And I lived on campus for most of my college career. Because I've always been a bit of a loner and a bit of awkward, I've never really been one to make a lot of friends. And until that point, I've only ever had one boyfriend in high school, and we just kind of decided to go our separate ways after dating for half a year. And when I say dating, I mean basically just talking in the hallways a lot. So yeah, you could say that I was a bit inexperienced when it came to boyfriends and relationships in general. Well, due to this lack of experience, I was a bit desperate, and the minute that a guy showed any interest in me, I kind of fell into it. In late 2009, around the end of August, when the fall semester started, I met a guy named Jack. And no, before anyone thinks it is, it's not his real name. Anyways, Jack was a bit of a quiet guy and seems like he didn't have many people that he would call friends. Basically, the exact kind of person that I was. Because of this, and because of a lab that we had to do with a partner, I ended up sitting by and subsequently getting to know Jack. I think the instructor saw that we were both loners and wanted to try and play matchmaker, which I really wish she hadn't. Jack and I became pretty good friends over the couple months that we worked together in that class, and there was some obvious chemistry between us. Then, on my birthday in January, he took me out to dinner and told me that he really had a crush on me and that he was wanting to ask me out. Long story short, we started dating. Of course, and again, I was inexperienced in the world of dating, and it pretty much felt the same to me, except we talked on the phone more and about deeper things. The relationship was going pretty well, honestly. We had our class together, we worked on various projects together, we studied for our exams, and while we were dating, I honestly was looking at Jack more of a best friend than a boyfriend. Obviously, I know now that it was likely that I didn't actually have feelings for him. But back then, I just kind of thought that this was what being in a relationship was for people in college. I mean, sure, others would go to parties, go drinking, clubbing or whatever, but that just wasn't who we were. We were the loner nerds, and I think I really just enjoyed having a fellow loner to talk to and spend time with. He treated me fine for the most part, and we rarely got into arguments, and I was happy. Obviously, this wouldn't be a story about a crazy ex if things didn't start to go sour, and they did start to go sour. We got together in January of 2010, and I think this all started around Valentine's Day. In fact, it was Valentine's Day that started to set this whole thing into motion. Something to note about me, I am a bit of a prude. I do not like my body, and I didn't like my body then, and I've just never really been into things that people think are sexy. This seemed like it wasn't that big of a deal to Jack, and we had never really even discussed sex in any way. Then, come Valentine's Day, I remember that he and I went out on a date, and it ended with us sitting in his car in the dorm parking lot. We were talking about how much we enjoyed dinner, how classes were going, and I think I was telling him about issues that my parents were having back home. And he handed me a box. My initial thought was chocolates, the stereotypical Valentine's gift. However, no, this was not chocolate. I opened it, and inside the box was a gently folded up nightgown that was mostly see-through. It was very clearly intended to be worn during, intimate moments. I recall that my face became beet red. I didn't expect this, and I didn't want it, and I really wasn't interested in what was being implied by him giving it to me. What's worse, despite my embarrassment and my clear look of mental anguish, Jack followed up with, "I have a bit of extra cash this month. How about you and I go to a hotel room tonight and see if you can try that on?" I think I honestly started to cry. Like, not tears of joy or sadness, just literal eyes watering from some strong level of embarrassment and disdain. I folded it back and placed it back in the box, then handed it to him. I told him that, as much as I really like him, and as much as I appreciate the thought, I was not ready for this relationship to go to the next level. I remember apologizing over and over again and just telling him that I was not ready. And after a few moments and heavy sighs, he turned to me and handed the box back. I was a bit upset, but he comforted me with, "Look, I'm not trying to pressure you. I really do love you and I want to be with you for the foreseeable future. So, what I want you to do, I want you to keep this, and then, when the day comes that you're ready, it'll be there. That way, I don't have to go through the awkward process of returning it, and we can still call it a gift. Is that okay?" And, of course, I accepted this proposal. I would keep it and then it would be there when I was ready. I told him that I didn't know when that would be, and he seemed genuinely okay with it. Everything about his statement, his behavior, and his attitude, all of it seemed genuine and I believed him. This was, unfortunately, where our relationship started to fall apart. We would spend time together and he would be super clingy, and then, by the end of the night, he would seem like he was super distant, like the night was great until it was over. Then, he would be upset. In hindsight, makes it super obvious why, but back then, it was just odd behavior for me. Anytime we would watch a movie that involved anything sexual, he would always get, well, let's just say, weird. Then, when nothing sexual happened between us, the next day he would be super pissed. I would ask him what was wrong, and he would always go off on me over literally nothing. He once yelled at me that I was awake too late after we had spent time together, because I posted a meme on Facebook about half an hour after he'd left. He seriously exploded because I shared a stupid meme after he'd left and told me that if he wasn't there at night, he wanted me in bed and asleep. That was actually one of the worst fights and where the already crumbling relationship seriously took a turn. After that night, when he would come over and be together, he would be super controlling, asking me where I was going every time I got up, asking who I was texting and who was texting me, and asking what I had done that day and scrutinizing every single thing that I said. Then, after he would leave, he would wait about 20 minutes and he would call me. I made the mistake of answering a couple times, and the times I answered, he actually yelled at me asking why the hell I was still awake. He would text me randomly throughout the day and ask me, more like demand, that I take a picture of myself and whatever was in front of me. So, to put it simply, he became ridiculously controlling and wanted to know every single detail about everything that I was doing. Again, this was my first relationship with an adult, the first time I had a boyfriend that I actually spent time with, and I had no idea what the hell I was doing or supposed to do. Then I actually had an event that gave me a bit of clarity. I was talking with my mother one day, literally talking to her about her going through a divorce with my father, and he texted me with a, "Hey, I want a pic of you." I think my tone changed and my mom noticed because she asked me what was wrong, and I broke down. Within a few seconds, I went from trying to comfort her to bawling my eyes out and telling her all about Jack and how he was ruining everything. I seriously just let it all come out. She straight out told me to dump him. She told me that she was unhappy in her marriage with my dad and that's why they were getting a divorce, and that she didn't want me to end up with someone that I didn't love or end up unhappy. At that point, it just kind of clicked. I had to break up with him for my sake, and I didn't want to end up in a loveless relationship with a man that controlled my every move. The next day when he came over, I told him that we needed to split up. He was, of course, furious. He started in with anger, then he started threatening to hurt himself, and then he started calling me every single awful word that he could think of. Obviously this hurt, but I let him finish it up, and then explained to him that I needed some time alone because of my parents getting a divorce and that the stress of my family breaking up was getting to me. Yes, this was a lie, but it was the best that I had. After I said that, he just kind of stood there, said that he was sorry, and then left. It was quite the amicable breakup that I was hoping for, but it was a breakup, and that's all that mattered. I honestly thought that it was over after that. Again, my naivety got the best of me. What I didn't expect was the barrage of calls and texts that followed. Jack would not leave me alone. It would be, "Hey, how are you?" in the morning, and then "You're such a stupid..." Well, I'm not going to finish what he said, but you can assume. This went on for a week, and then the "You don't know what you're missing out on" kind of text started, alongside pictures of his privates. This guy seriously went full-on creepy in a matter of around 8 days. It's pretty bad when I could even figure out that he wanted to be with me for literally just one thing. This went on for a couple weeks until the final night and the final event between us took place. It happened on the night of my mother's and my brother's birthday. They actually share the same birthday, so we always make it a point to have a family dinner out wherever they choose. We were out enjoying ourselves and having a great time at dinner, when out of nowhere, Jack seriously walks into the restaurant. I saw him walk in, and I saw him tell the waiter that he was with our party. He walked right over to the table and put his hands on my shoulder and squeezed, and started to say hi to my mother with the fakest voice that I've ever heard. The tension at the table was immediate, and my mom had never seen him, but it was obvious who he was. What's worse, he had the audacity to angrily ask who the hell the guy at the table was with us. And I said it was my brother, and then said that he needed to leave. My brother asked me if he needed to take care of this guy. I told him no, and honestly, it was a disaster that ended up with my brother and Jack getting into a sort of shoving match, and the manager dragging Jack out of the restaurant in a half-assed chokehold. Thankfully, they let us stay when I explained that Jack was my ex and that he had walked in to cause problems. They could see that I was being honest and told us that they would make sure that he didn't try to come back. After we ate, and after the embarrassment had worn off, we walked outside to go our separate ways. We were standing by my mother's car and talking, and almost out of nowhere, a crappy black Corolla guns it through the lot straight at us. My brother noticed it and was able to yell, and we all got out of the way. Well, my mom's car wasn't so lucky, and as you can probably assume, this Corolla belonged to Jack, and he had just committed attempted murder with his vehicle. He then backed up and tried to go as hard as he could in the direction that I ran, smacking into another car. Then he pulled away and took off. If I may say, this all sucked. My mom's car was seriously damaged, another random person's car was hit, and the back end smashed in. And all of this was because of this jackass that I decided to date for a few months. We called the cops, we talked to the management so we could find the person that owned the car that got hit. This whole thing was a disaster. I explained to the police everything that I had gone through with this guy and told them all the things that he'd sent me, and they said that they would be on a lookout for him, but at this point had to consider this as a hit and run. That night, my brother and I actually stayed at my mom's place. I was not going back somewhere where he would have access to me. and about an hour or two after we had gotten back to my mom's place, Jack actually called me. I was enraged, so I answered. I asked him what the hell was wrong with him, and probably had a few other choice words. This sick piece of shit seriously responded with, "I just want you to know that I have never been as aroused as I was when I tried to kill you." Seeing the terrified look on your face turned me on more than anything, and I can't wait to see that look on your face in class tomorrow. Then he hung up. Needless to say, I immediately called the police and informed them of what he had said. They updated the information and considered his "in class tomorrow" comment as a clear and present threat of danger, which apparently accusing someone of attempted vehicular homicide isn't. This story pretty much ends here, with Jack being arrested, expelled, and charged with several different things and thrown in prison for a few years. This was about 11 years ago. I know for a fact that he's out now, but thankfully he hasn't reached out to me or attempted to contact me in any way. I'm not going to lie, he is the one person that seriously scares the hell out of me. Mostly because he went from nice guy to attempted murderer within a couple of weeks because I wouldn't sleep with him. So Jack, the worst boyfriend that I have ever had, and the man I wish I would have never met in college, let's never meet again. And also, screw you for wrecking my mom's car like that. She seriously loved her Yaris and hasn't found one in that color blue since. Just over 10 years ago, I was dating my first ever girlfriend. We had just gone public and came out to our parents officially. At that time, I was 15 and female, and she was 16 and female if memory serves. Both of us lived in accepting households and went to an accepting school. However, for whatever reason we went public, she went fully off the deep end for our final year together. I will quickly mention that she was really abusive throughout our entire relationship. I had just gotten out of an extremely abusive household, so I had a hard time recognizing the danger that I was in. It somewhat felt normal, but it got particularly bad this one night when she snapped, I guess. I'm hesitant to attribute her behavior solely to a psychotic breakdown. I think she was an evil person genuinely. To summarize the lead up to this quickly, she had recently, within about 5 months leading up to this, told me that she had 7 souls living within her, all of which hated me. They were all men from the Victorian era, more or less. She lost herself to these men as each one emerged so she would abuse me in a unique way. I'm going to give them aliases, even though they're not really real. And I'm still afraid of her, or them, I guess. Duke. Duke liked to choke me in my sleep. Harold hit me. Han would try to cut me with knives when I was sleeping. Theo would ignore me or give me silent treatment. Gerald would force himself on me while sleeping, and Tim would pick apart my appearance and bully me. But Alex was the worst, and the entity that I had to deal with the most towards the end. Alex was the present one this evening. He'd play Paranormal Activity and torment me with the creepiest shit you've ever seen. He would sing in the corner of the room in the dark. He would mutter to himself constantly. He would smile at me while saying things like, "You'll die soon," or "You don't have to fear me when I'm unarmed." He was into knives and sharp things. He never self-harmed, but would try to harm me regularly. He also convinced me that if I ever left him, he would kill me. I was 15, so I believed it. You may be wondering at this point where our parents were in all of this. My parents had just freshly divorced and custody was being settled, so I stayed at my partner's place on the weekends and during some weekdays due to it being safer. Things were so messed up in my own household that it genuinely seemed safer at that time. This is also where my hesitancy comes in with the legitimacy of their psychosis. Whenever their parents were around, they would snap out of it, like literally a light switch. They could turn the crazy off and on like it was nothing, which made me think that they did this with the intention of harming me, not as a cry for help. Fast forward to the afternoon it happened, my final straw. We were downstairs, Alex/my girlfriend and myself were watching TV. Their parents were going to be out for the whole day, and upstairs was their older sibling, who was a complete hermit. They kept to their room with soundproof headphones on. Well, Alex also hated this person for no real reason. I was sitting at the downstairs kitchen table, working on some homework, when I hear Alex start humming in the corner. I turn around and ask if they're okay. They do the creepy smile and nod thing. I went into freeze mode, and then I just went back to my homework while keeping a close but discreet eye on them. It always got bad for me when I reacted, but I had a feeling that they were about to have a violent outburst. They started walking over to the kitchen, still humming, but there was a shake in their voice that I hadn't heard before. I looked up slowly and saw that they were taking a large paring knife out of the knife block, and I remember my adrenaline started to kick in, and I looked around for ways to defend myself. To my surprise, they started walking away from me, not towards me. I watched them walk down the hallway and towards the stairs before they exclaimed, "I'm going to freaking kill you," I presumed to their sibling. Something came over me, and before I knew it, I was booking up the stairs trying to stop them as they started running, knife in hand, up the stairs. I grabbed their pant leg and pulled them down a few steps. We both collapsed as their sibling opened their bedroom door and asked what was going on. Alex at this point turned around and struck me with a knife, leaving a gash on my arm and shoulder, and I retreated back downstairs as they calmly called out to their sibling, "Nothing, I just tripped, I'm okay, thanks." I ran to the kitchen downstairs, texted my parent to come and get me, and started cleaning and bandaging my arm. Alex returned at this point, and as soon as we made eye contact, they dropped the knife. They walked into the kitchen and sat on the floor and started singing to themselves while rocking back and forth. I was stunned, literally going into shock, and I stared at them, bloody tissues in hand, and informed them that I was done with this bullshit and I was going to wait outside for my parent. They began crying through the song they were singing and still smiling like a maniac. I never went back after that. I broke up with them over the phone about a week later. They sobbed and told me that they'd get rid of their souls and that she still loved me. I didn't listen. I just hung up and that was that. She even dropped out of school, and I literally never saw her again after that. Years later, I found out that she started dating this friend of hers that I was also familiar with as a teenager. Then found out that she was cheating on me with them for the entire time that her and I dated. I tried to feel bad for her for years, but honestly, I'm still healing from the several attempts at my life. It's hard to feel bad for an abuser, let alone an attacker. So thank you for letting me get this out of my chest. I've been in therapy for this recently, and I wanted to share it to kind of reflect on it also. If you have any questions or need clarification, let me know. I left a lot of information out just to keep this short. Back when I was single and I used some online dating pages, I had a few dates that were probably in the category of awful and painful, but only one that was really creepy. There was one time that I had matched with a girl named Cindy, and we talked for a bit, hit it off, the basic start to a good thing when it comes to dating. And after chatting it up, we decided that we would want to meet for dinner the next night. We meet up, and she's exactly as she was in the pictures, and she was incredibly friendly. We had a quick conversation outside the restaurant, and then we went in to get our food. The dinner started out as perfect as it could have, and about 20 minutes in, after we had gotten our drinks and put in our food order, I noticed that there was a woman sitting at a table a few spots down that was glaring at me. At first, I thought she was staring at something behind me, but I was at the wall and there was nothing to stare. I mentioned it to Cindy and I said, "Hey, there's a woman that is sitting behind you. She's staring daggers at me right now." She put her hands over her face and said, "Oh God, blonde, long hair, glasses?" While this was a vague description, it was exact. This woman was blonde, had long hair, and thick glasses on her face. I told her that she was right and asked if she knew her. Come to find out, this woman that was murdering me with her eyes was Cindy's ex-girlfriend. I had no problem that Cindy was for both teams. What I had a problem with was the fact that I thought that this woman was going to legit murder me at a moment's notice. I asked if I should be concerned, and she said probably not, which was not at all convincing. And after a few moments, our waiter brings over our food. We thank him and then he walks away. No more than 45 seconds later, Cindy's ex stands up and walks over to our table. "Hey, Cindy. Leave me alone, please." At this point, I could tell that Cindy and this woman did not break up on good terms. Cindy's face was visibly red, and I could tell that she was having a bit of a panic attack. "Please, just go away." "I don't like this one," the other woman said before she grabbed my drink off of the table and practically heaved it at me. She then said, "See you around," to Cindy, then looked over at me and told me to watch my back and then walked away. Like that wasn't the most terrifying thing she could have said to me. So there I was, soda covering my food, my shirt and my pants, and the look on my face was probably one of complete and total shock. Thankfully, the waiter had actually seen what happened, so he rushed over and told me that he would get the manager and he would get the food taken care of. I wasn't really concerned about the burger. I was more so worried about Cindy and maybe a little bit for myself. By this point, Cindy was actually in tears. I asked her what was up with that woman and if she was actually in any danger. Honestly, I was just trying to gauge the situation and figure out if I needed to call the cops. She then proceeds to tell me that Amanda, the ex, was pretty much a stalker at this point. She had followed Cindy around on each date she had, ruined her relationships, and had even literally stabbed her last boyfriend. She said that it was only in his hand, that he was completely alive and fine, but that he had broken up with her after this. She said that every time she thought Amanda was going to be gone for good, she would appear the minute that Cindy tried to move on. The worst part, this has been going on for 2 full years at this point. She said that she'd filed a restraining order, she contacted the police, and nothing was ever being done about it. She said that for some reason, The authorities were taking it lightly and that they weren't really doing much to keep Amanda away. She told me that the stabbing incident had happened over 3 months ago and that she waited this long to see if maybe it would work to get rid of Amanda. Well, it didn't. Amanda was very much there and very angry. At the end of the date, after we had dinner and talked more about this Amanda, Cindy told me that it was best that we didn't see each other again. She apologized and said that if Amanda ever disappeared entirely, she would give me a call and then maybe we could try again. I agreed and we went our separate ways. On my way home, I called my brother to tell him what had happened, and he honestly laughed at me. He then told me that I was played and that Cindy was just trying to get free food and that Amanda was her wing woman. I started to believe him, and I was actually a bit upset that I had fallen for it and that they were such good actors. That is, until the next morning. I got up and got my coffee, then went to take my dog for a walk when I saw the end result of Amanda's anger. My windshield was smashed and all 4 of my tires had been slashed. On top of that, the phrase, "She's mine," was spray painted on the hood. Obviously, I called the police, got the report and made the insurance claim. Thankfully, I had good coverage. I also sent pictures to my brother and asked if he still thought that I was being played. In the end, I never spoke to Cindy again, and I didn't message her to tell her about the damage to my car. I told the police about the night before, but they didn't really seem interested. Every now and then, I start to think about Cindy and I wonder if she's out there, if she's doing okay. I really do worry that Amanda may lose her mind and attack her one day. I guess my final thought: to Amanda, the absolute psychotic ex-girlfriend of Cindy, I hope you and I never meet again. I met Trent when I was 30 years old. We met in a relatively old-fashioned way, mainly because I've always shunned online dating and I prefer meeting people face to face. I've always trusted my gut instincts when I met people, and we met at a town dance. I come from one of those country towns where everyone knows each other and there is a strong sense of community out here. While people are suspicious of strangers, they tend to turn a blind eye to bad behavior from people inside the community. It is one of the most frustrating parts of living in a community like this. And despite this, I love my hometown. Trent, it's a nickname by the way, was the cousin to one of the more well-established families in the town. If you're not from these small towns, it can be hard to understand, but essentially, many of their family have important businesses and own a considerable amount of property. Trent wasn't raised in the town and was raised in one of the big cities. Trent was charming, sweet, and caring. Everyone told me how lucky I was to be with him, and if we got married, I would be set up for life. We dated for nearly 2 years before we moved in together. 6 months later, we were engaged, and he told me how he wanted to look after me. I've been raised by a long line of independent women who want to make sure that they make their own money. And over time, I was worn down by the promises and the hope of an easy life. I let him take care of the finances. We lived a good life, regularly going on expensive trips and restaurants, new clothes, and a lot of items that I didn't really need. I was living the good life. My friends frequently told me how jealous they were that I found someone like this, and I thought that I was blessed too. But whenever I tried to conserve our power usage, Trent would reassure me not to worry and that it was covered. I didn't like this. It was wasteful. Trent and I talked about having children together someday, what we would name the kids, how we would raise them, and what we wanted for our family. Trent wanted a massive family with around 7 children. I'm not young by any means, and didn't really think that I could have that many. I told him this, and he was okay with it. I had 3 kids with him who are my world, and I love each of them. And over time, my focus changed from us having a lifestyle around going out and socializing to raising our children. I don't think he liked this as much and went out of his way to spoil our kids, buying them whatever they wanted whenever they wanted it. I told him that it was bad to spoil the kids, and so in the children's eyes, I was the big and mean mummy. He told me one day that he wanted to leave the quiet country town that we had called home, a place that I lived all my life. We talked about it and looked for places that we could go. He seemed really panicked for some reason, but wouldn't tell me what was wrong. I kept asking him if I could help, and he got really snappy at me one day and even punched the wall when he got so worked up. This wasn't the same man that I married. I woke up one day and all of his things were gone. He took a bag, left an apology note, and I called everyone, his family, his friends, the police, and there were no signs of this coming. Our children were so scared for their father and missed him terribly. It was when I found out the stash of bills and credit cards that had been taken out using my name. I stared in shock at them. He hadn't been paying the bills, and there were final notices approaching. I had my first panic attack and woke up on the floor. I thought it was a nightmare, but it was reality. I called up the bank and utilities company, and anyone who would listen to me. I called my mom and my friends. I was terrified about what would happen. I was scared that I would lose my house, and I called my husband's number, begging him to come home and to sort all of this out. It turns out that Trent had been in debt and had done this sort of thing before. There is a police investigation, and I couldn't believe how stupid I was. It was taking years to properly clear my name and my credit. Financially, he destroyed me, and I wish I kept working to keep up my skills in the job market. Luckily for me, a family friend heard of my situation and gave me a job, advice, and also a place to stay while things were being sorted. It was hard on the kids. They were used to getting whatever they wanted, and then they had to make do with whatever they had. They asked where their daddy was all this time, and I'd lie to them telling them that he loves them and he would come home someday. I try to look for him on social media when I have spare time. One time I found him, and he was already with another woman. As the investigation went on, I discovered that I wasn't the only woman that he conned, and if he isn't stopped, I won't be the last. Ever since, I have been trying to repair my life. I'm trying to get a divorce, and at first, his family tried to brush it off or blame me for whatever happened. I'm not going to be silenced over this. Some of the friends I had when I was living the high life disappeared when I needed them. Here is the advice that I have for any young woman or young man or whatever out there. Don't blindly trust someone to manage your finances. Always at least be involved in the process and keep an eye on your money. If possible, also keep up with your skills in case something happens where you need to rejoin the workforce. 'Cause I really wish that I did. This recently came up again within a group of friends, so I decided that I would share it with more people. About 4 years ago, I started dating a girl that I met online named Kendra. We matched, she messaged me first, and we actually hit it off pretty quickly. We started officially dating after the 3rd date, and everything seemed fine. She was pretty fun to be around, even if we were just chilling at home. She was very open about herself and her past, which was nice that she was open, but it also made me let my guard down at first. I kind of felt bad for her. She explained how she didn't have a good childhood as her mother was very abusive to her, and she didn't know her father, so she moved in with her boyfriend at that time when she was 16. She then explained how she got pregnant and her boyfriend didn't want the kid and suffocated their baby at like 2 months old. She seemed pretty happy, but obviously she had some issues, but definitely nothing that I thought was a deal breaker or anything. But then as the months went on, her stories became wilder and wilder. The stories she would tell me were so bizarre that they became hard to believe, especially when they were brought up in situations that would benefit her. Like, if I was planning on going somewhere with friends or family, she would make me feel about her childhood trauma and says that she doesn't want to be left alone. When I did suggest that she come along with me to take my dog to the park or something, she would decline, saying that she couldn't walk or stand long due to her condition. She claimed that she had some kind of infection in her leg that permanently damaged the muscle or bone, so she couldn't walk long distances. Yet, she's dragged me to her friends' parties where she stood and danced for hours. She also claimed that she had to dye her hair black. She was a natural blonde, but she had to dye her hair because the light color absorbed too much sunlight and it was giving her a brain tumor. She said this was directly from her doctor, that she could have surgery and have her head shaved, or she could just keep dyeing her hair. Look, I don't know why I stayed with her at that point, but I guess I just thought that maybe she still had things to work out from her childhood and that I could help her move on. I had no reason not to believe her about her family or her baby, so I guess I tried to just move past it. However, it did start to take its toll on me as she started having an excuse for literally everything. It was pretty obvious. When it was something that she wasn't interested in or wanted to do, she had an excuse. And when I would tell her that I was still going without her, something would happen to try and stop me. For example, every Wednesday, me and a few of my friends would gather for game night. We were all off on Thursday, so it was easier than on the weekends, and I never missed. I invited her to go, but she didn't want to. I told her then that I would call her when I left. She would call me halfway through, complaining that she wasn't feeling well and wanted me to pick something up for her, or that she needed me to take her to the ER because she had an accident like cutting her finger or something. Even when I was with her and friends, if I got into a conversation or we started having fun, she would be very dramatic and grab her leg or stomach or something, anything. And of course, everyone would turn and ask her if she was okay, so now the attention is on her. Illnesses were a common tactic with her. I started to learn pretty quickly who she really was. The whole time I was with her, she didn't even have a job. She pretty quickly started to leech onto me and my wallet, but I just ignored it, believing that I was in love. And when she didn't get her way, she threw a fit, and we would make up in the form of me buying her something. I really started to put things together and grew more suspicious when she invited me to go with her and her sister to lunch and shopping. She thought of me as her bank account. Along with telling me that she was abused, she also claimed to be an only child. When I mentioned this to her, she became angry and wouldn't give me a straight answer other than I was obviously remembering wrong. I know for a fact that she told me she was an only child because she used the sob story many times that she had no one because it was just her and her abusive mom. So, being curious, I went with her to meet this mystery sister. And to my surprise, they looked very much alike. I have siblings too, and I know we all look similar, but they look like they could be twins. And that's because they were. The only real difference was her sister had a darker blonde hair color and a mole above her eyebrow. Listening to them talk about things made me feel like a lot of things Kendra had told me was a lie. There were things her sister would even bring up, and she would get upset and say that she didn't want to talk about it. I caught both of them looking over at me at times. So after that day, I went home with a lot of questions and really debated on how to bring them up. It turns out I wouldn't have to do much, as the next day, her sister sent me a message request on Facebook. She was kind, and it started as a nice to meet you kind of thing. But then after a few hours, she said she had some questions for me. She asked me if Kendra had mentioned their childhood to me, and I said yes. But after us both beating around the bush some more, it was finally revealed that she was never abused. In fact, Kendra was the abuser. They were actually twins and they had a younger sister. Kendra would constantly attack both of them, and as a teenager, she even hit her mom. Hell, her parents were married and her dad was even still alive. She was never kicked out, but rather went to a juvenile detention due to threatening her little sister with a knife, and she never had a kid. Her sister apologized as she knew that she was a habitual liar and wanted to know what all I knew or was told. I thanked her for being honest, and I took the rest of the day to really think about what to do. I finally got up the courage and I told her that we needed to talk, and I asked her if I could come over. I figured that it would be easier to leave her place than kicking her out of mine. So I went over and I told her that I wanted to talk to her about some things that she has told me, and I confronted her about her lies. I told her that her sister told me everything and I wanted to give her one last chance. I wanted to hear the truth from her, and I wanted to know why lie about any of it. But instead of coming clean, she just doubled down on the lies and tried saying that she was her half-sister and she was just trying to take me from her. Her sister even told me that she would probably try that too. I told her that I had enough and that we were done. If she couldn't be honest with me, it wasn't going to work out. I guess one thing that I didn't really take into consideration though was when her sister mentioned that Kendra was the abuser. So when I turned around to grab my jacket and leave, she started screaming and then ran towards me. She was jumping on my back. We went back and forth like this, of me struggling to get her off because she had her legs wrapped around me and had a tight grip on my hair with one hand while punching me in the head and shoulders with the other. I finally managed to throw myself backwards onto her kitchen floor where she let go. But before I could get to my feet, I was hit in the head and I was knocked out cold. The next thing I remember, there were cops and EMTs standing over me in her house, asking me a bunch of questions. And once they checked me out to make sure that I was okay to stand, I was placed in cuffs and put in the back of a squad car. After being taken back to the station, I was finally questioned and given the opportunity to explain my side of things. I told them why I was there, how I knew Kendra, what led to me being on the kitchen floor, but I didn't know how I got there. They asked me if I had physically harmed her at all, and I explained other than pretty much dropping her on the floor as well as myself, I hadn't touched her. And after a few hours, they finally let me go, but not before telling me how they got involved. Apparently, she hit me in the head with a meat tenderizer. So they told me that I should still go to the hospital to check if I had a concussion afterwards. Then, they were called by a neighbor as she was running up and down the street outside, screaming for help. She told them that I had barged into her place in a fit of rage after she broke up with me, and then I attacked her. They checked us both out and took pictures. And since I had multiple marks on my back, my head, my shoulders, and my face, and she had not a single scratch or bruise, they believed me. They suggested that I stay away from her though, and I promised them just that. I just went home and I talked to a few friends about what happened, and I even messaged her sister to let her know what she did. Kendra tried calling me a few times, but nope, all to voicemail for her. She stopped trying pretty quickly, thank God, and I just moved on, living to tell my crazy ex tale. Until this past Christmas, when she tried to add me on Facebook, that was an immediate block. My story starts back when I was 19 years old. As a lot of young girls do, I didn't have the best self-esteem, and I clung to people that showed interest in me, be it just platonic or romantic. This is when I met a man named Rich. He was about 12 years my senior, and at that time, I just saw him as a good friend. I was working at a local thrift store, and he came in there a few times, and in fact, I think I caused him to frequent there more often. He was always kind to me and seemed to actually care. He would ask how work was going and how my week had been. I was wanting to go to college, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to major in yet. When the store was slow, he even talked to me about what I was interested in and tried to help me find my way. I had never experienced this kind of attention, so I guess I was falling for it. It started as me just hanging out with him after work as friends. He had taken me out for dinner many times, and I even went to his house, as I was still living at my home. My parents had even met him, and why they never questioned their 19-year-old daughter hanging out with a 31-year-old was beyond me. But then, things turned romantic between us. I truly felt that I had found my prince and that we would have this happily ever after life. At the age of 20, less than a year after we met, I became pregnant. He even assured me that he would always be there to take care of the both of us. He welcomed me to move in with him officially, and even convinced me to quit my job, promising that we would financially be fine, and that way I could focus on being the best mom that I could to our child. Everything was going as he promised, too. The whole time that I was pregnant, we were in that honeymoon phase. He did everything for me. He went to all my appointments, he helped me when I was sick, and he even catered to my silly cravings. But then, when our daughter Adelaide was born, I fell in love all over again. Even after she arrived, we were doing great. We were both happy. She was healthy, and we learned how to be the best parents that we could together. We did have a few moments here or there, like when she would wake up throughout the night or when nothing we would do seemed to comfort her. But I thought that that was just the nervousness and stress of being a parent. My grandmother, though, has been my rock throughout my life, and she was on the speed dial at any time that I had concerns. Needless to say, she helped me through a lot. But things started slowly turning sour day by day, and it really broke me. It would start as Rich having to work late a lot, so I saw him less. And when he would come home, he seemed to be in a bad mood, or just really didn't want to talk about it. He was an electrical engineer, so I'm sure that it was stressful, as all jobs have their bad days. But he just never seemed to want to talk to me about it anymore. And then he would just call me to say that he wouldn't be home for dinner, and not to stay up for him. Again, he would claim that it was work-related, but I had my doubts. And when he finally arrived at midnight or even later and passed out on the couch. But I had my doubts when he finally arrived at midnight or even later and passed out on the couch. In fact, I started seeing him less and less as a whole. I would see him off in the morning, but then that was about it. Even on the days that he was off or had an event to go to, he did not want to be around me. He stayed out, and he didn't have me go with him. He used to take me and Addie to his parents' place on occasion, but when I got ready to go once, he got mad at me for assuming and then left us there. It got to the point that the only time that I left the house was to get the mail or occasionally get groceries after nagging him about it being low. He failed to realize this because he was hardly home to eat with us. He became verbally abusive and mocked me when I tried to ask him for the simplest things or for any kind of intimacy from him. I craved our conversations, our silly inside jokes, or even just holding each other on the couch. I became severely reclusive and depressed. I hardly talked to my friends or family, and I certainly didn't get to go anywhere or do anything because I didn't even have my own money. Hell, I even tried talking to him about going to school so that I could help pay for things, and he wouldn't have it. He would shoot it down every time, saying that it was too late for that now and that I was stupid for even considering it. As I mentioned earlier, the only thing other than my little girl that kept me going was my grandma. I talked to her about everything, and when I stopped calling her weekly, or seemed to want to talk very long, she surprised me with a visit and brought her homemade chicken casserole and some groceries. I broke down, and I told her what had been going on, and she told me that I needed to give him an ultimatum and stick to it. Rich was definitely verbally abusive but never physically so she definitely gave me the strength to do it. To wrap up the sob story, I guess, the ultimatum kind of did not go in my favor, or at least not how I would have wanted. He kicked me out. He told me that I was just ungrateful and that I could just leave. I tried talking to him about Addie, but that's when he dropped it on me that he couldn't care less about her as she didn't believe that she was his kid. He was my first serious relationship, and I was a virgin when I met him. Well, heartbroken me, I packed up the few things that I had that were important to me, and all of Addie's things, and then I moved in with my grandparents until I got back on my feet. Fast forward about 4 years, and I am still with my grandparents, but we are all happy. My grandfather had an accident, so I decided to stay to help my grandma take care of him. They loved spending time with Addie and watching her while I was in school. Yes, I finally started school and I was working part-time and I loved it. I was happy with my life, even as a single parent. Addie even started going to pre-K, and I would pick her up before I went to class in the evenings. Well, that's where things went downhill again. The school Addie was going to was very big on security, which is why I chose them. So when I got a call from them saying that someone that was not authorized tried to pick her up early, they called me immediately. Only my grandparents and sister were on the authorized pickup list. I left work and I went to the school when I saw cop cars around. I had to show ID and I had to be checked before they let me in. Little did I know that the cops were there because of me and Addie. The principal described the guy that attempted to get Addie, and when they refused to let them, saying that they would call me first to ask, they stormed out. That's when they called me, and shortly after, they had a lockdown as they saw the same guy walking the fence of the play area where the kids were about to be released from recess. And rightfully so, they feared that he may try to do something to the kids or even abduct Addie. As you may have guessed, it was Rich. I hadn't gotten as much as a phone call from him in years. And here he was, trying to take our kid from school, and our kid that he wanted nothing to do with. They had me identify him later that day as they caught him hanging around the school and had him in custody. After a lot of back and forth with him and the cops, it came down to him wanting a relationship with his daughter. Now, nearly 5 years later, he cares? I hated it. I felt like this was him trying to control me again, but once again, my grandma talked me through it and said to keep an open mind. There didn't need to be anything between us other than being parents to the same child, but if he's changed, maybe he can actually be a good father. So after a lot of lawyer talk, we worked out a supervised visitation. If I wasn't present, my sister and her husband were there. If he would try to take her from school, I didn't trust that he wouldn't try to take her if they were alone. And as expected, he used this time to try to get back with me. When that didn't work, he would become angry and then end the visitation. When my sister and brother-in-law went, he brought another girl with him and was too busy with her to pay attention to Addie. It was just an attempt to make me jealous, I guess. And one of the last times that I saw him, it was just me again, and when I finally put my foot down telling him that I was here for Addie and not him, and that I didn't want a relationship with him. He went in to kiss me, and when I pulled away, he slapped me, saying that it would be the biggest mistake that I've ever made and how I wasn't thinking about our daughter. I grabbed Addie, who had been playing alone at the park, and we left. I was ready to get a stern talking to for ending his visitation early, but I never got a call. This was obviously his main motive, as once again, I never heard from him. He stopped showing up to visitations, he wouldn't answer my calls, and even his lawyer gave me the whole "don't call me, I'll call you" line, and that was it. It's been 3 years since then, and I know it probably sounds bad and selfish, but I hope that I never hear from him again. Addie deserves to have a father in her life that cares for her, and not just as a way to get to me. And until then, my grandfather has filled that role really well, and I can't thank them enough. I just have that fear in the back of my mind that he's going to show up one day and attempt to take her again. I hope she's never in a position to allow that to happen. Back in 2017, I was in a pretty healthy relationship. Charlotte and I had been together for almost 3 years, and we were thinking about the future. We started looking at apartments together, and if things continued to go as well as they had been, I was going to save up to propose to her. However, even though a lot of the places we looked at were her choice, and she seemed so excited about this, she threw a huge curveball at me. She told me that she had a great career opportunity in Oregon. We lived in Missouri. At first I thought, okay, a cross-country move is a huge step, but I was willing to do it if it meant a better life for the both of us. And even if it was kind of scary, moving out of state could also be exciting. But much to my surprise, her plans did not involve me. She said she wanted to make a life for herself out there first before she thought about a relationship. And before I could even recommend it, she shot down the long-distance thing, saying that she couldn't guarantee that she wouldn't cheat. It really hurt, but at least she was honest. I didn't know how to feel though. I understand wanting to do what's best for your own good, but why even consider apartment searching? Why lead me on to believe that we had a future together? Overall, I was definitely upset and heartbroken, but I moved on, wishing her the best. But I wasn't the only one caught off guard by this. Even some of her family found it odd. I was actually pretty good friends with her younger brother, as that's how I met her, and he was telling me how their parents were shocked that she just left everything behind. They were worried that maybe something sinister was going on and forcing her to leave out of fear or something. But she assured everyone that that was not the case, and even showed us pictures of her new place and shared some links to the place that she was going to be working for. It was an illustration company. Well, knowing that she was at least okay, we tried talking to her here and there, but I think overall, it just made me feel worse, so we agreed that it was best to cut ties. Now, it's been several years since this event happened. I've entirely moved on and I'm happy. I decided to make some changes in my life too, and I got a new job. I met a girl named Valerie that worked at the same place as me, and I could instantly tell that there was a connection. We went on a date, hit it off immediately, and we had been together for about 4 years now. Charlotte wasn't even a thought in my mind. I was still good friends with her brother, but we hardly talked, but that was just life. So, needless to say, I wanted to propose to Valerie, and when I got hints from her and her friends, I took it as the go-ahead. Things definitely felt different, but in a good way compared to Charlotte. And to make it the second best day of my life, she said yes. At that point, life started moving pretty quickly. So when I was waiting in line to get coffee, I didn't notice the people around me until I heard my old nickname, making me look around. That's when I saw Charlotte. We hugged, and I asked her what she was doing here. She explained that she was thinking about moving back, but was just visiting for a week. We quickly caught up for a bit, and she suggested that we grab a coffee or lunch together sometime. I agreed. I gave her another hug, and then I left. I even went home and I told Val that I had run into her. We were very open with each other, and she knew of Charlotte, so she saw no issues with us catching up either. It was probably a few days after that we met up at the same place. We sat and talked about the past years. She showed me so many places of Oregon and places that she went to, and even a few famous people that she met through her work. So I asked her, since things were going so well, why she would want to move back there. Her answer was vague, but she said something about being able to work on her own time, and she wanted to be closer to her family. Then she turned the conversation on me, and I told her that I was engaged. She looked surprised, but also said that she was happy for me. As we continued to talk, I noticed her becoming more and more hands-on. She would touch my shoulder, going down my arm. She would grab my hands or even rub my leg with her foot. It was a weird feeling, to say the least. It reminded me of who she was when we were together. I mean, I didn't feel anything as I was in love with Val, but the thought was in the back of my head. Was she trying to do something? Was this her flirting? I tried not to think about it, and we parted after a few hours. When I saw Valerie that evening, I told her what happened, and she really found it odd, and even thought maybe there was a hint of jealousy from Charlotte. Maybe, but otherwise, she wasn't worried about it. So, again, we moved forward with our life, and I got random casual messages from Charlotte. My phone number never changed after all. However, we started having strange events occur, and honestly, never really connected them at that time. Val ended up moving to another location under the same business that we worked for, so we were no longer riding together. However, I had to take her to work one day because she went to leave one morning, and her tire was flat. But it wasn't like it just lost air or like there was a nail. I didn't even have to look for the cause. Towards the back side of the tire, there was a pretty big puncture in it. It wasn't a clear cut like a knife, but it wasn't mangled like the tire just exploded. Not to mention, there was no additional damage to the car either. We were just confused, but I just took her to work and I told her that I would take care of it. Val had a pretty new car. I went with her to test it out, and it was only a few years old at that time. But she ended up having a pretty scary issue with it. We kissed each other goodbye one morning and left for the day. When we got to work, we usually texted each other one more time saying, "Have a good day," with me usually being the first one as my drive was shorter by about 15 minutes. When I didn't get a text back, I thought that it was odd, but I just assumed that she forgot or someone stopped her on her way in, both of which have happened before. So after I got in and to my desk, I was prepared to text her when she called me hysterical. When I finally got her to calm down, she explained what happened. She said that she noticed her car hesitated a little when she shifted from reverse to drive, but ignored it as it soon went away. She thought maybe she just imagined it, but made a mental note to tell me about it when she got to work. However, she wouldn't make it to work because as she rolled up to a red light, her brakes kicked back and did nothing else. She went right through that intersection at about 30 miles per hour, instantly T-boning a van. Her airbag deployed and she was obviously shaken up. She told me the police were already there and the tow trucks were on their way, so I left immediately to be with her. The sight was pretty terrifying, and I felt so bad that she had to be in that situation and alone to boot. The van had a woman and her toddler in it, but both were in their seatbelts and the kid in their car seat, so they were okay as well, just a little bit shaken up. After the scene was cleaned up, we went home and she walked me through the situation again. It definitely sounded like something happened to the brakes. So after they towed the car back, I had someone come take a look at it to see if they could diagnose the issue. They were certainly able to, and they told us that the brake line had been cut, and it was obviously done by someone that wasn't trying to replace a line or done by accident. He said you could see where they tried to cut it in multiple spots until they finally got through. We were terrified and confused. Who would try to do this? Valerie was such a kind person, and it's not like she had any enemies that came to mind, so I didn't know how to handle this. But then, she asked me if I thought Charlotte would do something like that. I also didn't see Charlotte as the type to do that, and while we talked, it was still a very casual conversation. She wouldn't have known where we lived, and while I was questioning this, she brought something to my attention that she hadn't really told me about. She had gotten a few calls at work, like they were transferred to her office line specifically looking for her. But when she would answer, they would just hang up. She thought that it was weird. Sure, but nothing scary or worth mentioning. Then a few days prior to the accident, she got another call, and this time, the person talked and said something with a slight giggle like, "Nice car you got," and then hung up. I was horrified. I didn't want to think about Charlotte possibly doing this or even entertain the idea. But then I remembered the way she acted when we met up. I couldn't rule it out, so I called her while Valerie was in the room so she could hear her voice. I played it off like I thought she called me and I was returning the call, so it didn't last long. But I could tell by the look on Valerie's face that it was the same voice. I was furious. Why would she try to do this? She was the one that left me behind, and now, almost a decade later, She wants to ruin my life? As mad as I was, I started coming up with a plan. I bought a camera and I had it set up to face our driveway. Then, I texted Charlotte asking to go get coffee again. When she showed up, I was not friendly at all like I was the first time. I asked her point blank if she was following or stalking my fiancé. She looked at me like I was crazy and denied it. But then when I mentioned her stupid phone calls, she had this stupid grin on her face and actually said that she was just trying to have a little fun. But, she was pretty easy to track down, she said. She admitted to the calls, but would never fess up about the car. But after I chewed her out some, she started to show her true colors. She said that I was the one in the wrong. I was supposed to wait for her to come back and have a relationship with her again and her only. That was never the case. She broke up with me and she ended it because she obviously had plans to hook up with other people. Why did I have to wait around for her? I was supposed to be all alone those years? Hell no. I told her that she was crazy and she needed to leave us alone because we were happy and I would never, ever be with her again or want to talk to her again. And I left that place feeling much better already. I knew we wouldn't really be able to take legal action though unless we had proof. And that was why the camera came in. I had a feeling that she would try something again, and I was right. It was 3 or 4 days later when we checked the camera, as we do every time before we leave, and we were also sharing a car at the same time. There she was, clear as day, walking around and inspecting my car. She then proceeded to pour something in my gas tank, wiped off the side and the cover, prints I assume, and climbed on the hood and pulled her pants down and squatted. I'll let you fill in the rest. Charlotte has absolutely lost it. I have never seen this side of her, and I was frustrated and embarrassed that I ever let her back into my life. Sorry, this took so long, but to wrap it up, we pressed charges, filed restraining orders, and were able to sue her for the damages to my car, at least. And as we expected, we never heard from her again, and thankfully, her brother had no ill will towards me either. He said that she complained to him about me being engaged, and he basically told her to get over it, like I did, because I had to move on. I think exes are better left at that too. No friends, no contact, just old memories. Good or bad, I suppose. I have a story that I've been wanting to share with the world for a while. A story that really taught me a lesson about trusting people and made me realize that things can go really bad, really fast. I am going to add a bit of a trigger warning here, as this story does end in a horrifying way. This happened a while back when my high school ex-boyfriend, a guy we're going to call Christian, came back into my life after close to a decade of being out of touch. Back in high school, Christian and I were really close. He was probably the most connected relationship that I've ever had, if that makes any sense. He was actually the first guy that I got with, in multiple meanings of the word, and I thought that he and I had this really bright future planned out. In my head, we were going to get married, we were going to have kids, and we were going to grow old together. In reality, Christian didn't want more than a high school fling that he planned on cutting away from the minute he graduated. He ended up telling me as much only a quarter away from graduation. We were talking about the future, and when I asked if we were going to stay in state, he said that after May, there was no we. Well, needless to say, we broke up that day, and it crushed me. Fast forward around 8 or 9 years later, and I'm single, living my best life, and just doing whatever life brings my way, when out of the blue, I get a friend request on Facebook from a face that I hadn't thought about in ages. Christian. Being the nostalgic idiot that I am, I immediately went to accept it. But I hesitated when I thought about how our relationship ended. I sat on it for a couple hours, but eventually decided that we were both young, we both made mistakes, and it wasn't anything more than a friend request on Facebook. If he had grown up enough to seek me out and reconnect, then I could grow up enough to accept it. But what I didn't expect was that clicking that button was going to be the opening of my own personal Pandora's box. At first, everything was chill. We messaged back and forth, and it seemed like he really had his life together. After high school, he went out of state for college, and he had actually gotten married and had a son. I congratulated him for all that, saying that it was great to hear that he was doing well. But then, he told me that he and his wife had gotten a divorce, and she had done everything that she could to keep his son from him, so he was actually moving back in with his mom for a bit to get back on his feet. I apologized, and I told him that this was awful, and after a bit of talking more, he told me that he was actually in town, and we agreed to meet up for lunch the next day to just catch up. Now, nowhere in this conversation and nowhere in my mind was there any intentions of making this anything beyond just being friends. I didn't want anything beyond that. I just wanted a friend and wanted to meet up to catch up with him. When we met at the restaurant, I went in for a friendly hug, and when he hugged me, his hand wandered way too far down my back. I immediately pushed away and looked at him like, "Bro, what the hell?" He quickly apologized and said that he just got absorbed in the moment and didn't mean anything by it. I told him that this was his one warning and that if he tried anything else, this meeting was over, which I think caught him off guard. I think he expected me to be a bit more submissive, mostly because when I was young, I was way more willing to go along with things. But in the years since then, I've become a lot more self-sufficient and mentally sound, and I'm not the kind of person to take crap. I told him as much, and he nodded, saying all right, and continuing to apologize. The rest of the lunch went pretty normal. Nothing else happened, and I figured he knew his place. Of course, that was the wrong thing to believe. About 2 days later, I got a message from Christian on Facebook that said, "Thinking of you," with a picture of something that I genuinely did not expect nor want to see. The situation was very disappointing for multiple reasons, and I had told him that that was the end of it. I replied saying, "I told you that if you did anything like this again, that would be the end of it." He immediately said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. That was for someone else, I swear." I messaged back saying that it was nice to see that he was doing well, but that this was the end of our conversations, and then I immediately blocked him. I'm not stupid. I knew what he was doing, and I wasn't going to be a rebound fling. Plus, he's not exactly the kind of person that I'm into anymore. After that, the situation with Christian went off the rails, and did so pretty quickly. One night, about 2 weeks later, I was out with some friends at a local bar, just trying to have a good time. And lo and behold, Christian showed up. He walked in and came straight over to us, acting like he was my best friend. The entire feel of the night changed immediately. My 3 friends all glanced at me like, "Who is this guy?" And Christian stood over me and smiled like everything was fine. I hit my limit the second that he put his hands on my shoulders and said, "How are you doing, babe?" I shoved my seat backwards to make sure that it made contact with him. I stood up, turned around, and told him that I wasn't his babe and that he needed to leave me alone. He laughed and asked why I was being like this, and I went off on him. I told him that I had given him a chance to be my friend and nothing more, and he decided that he wanted to be a creep instead. I told him again to shove off and get the hell back out of my life. After a few minutes, he backed off and looked like he was about to cry and then just walked away. I kind of assumed that was going to be the end of it, that he would understand that I wanted nothing to do with him. Either that or the next encounter was going to end violently. And fortunately for me, it was more likely to be the latter. After Christian left, the whole night was ruined and we all decided to head home. I had driven my friend Michelle out that night. She had planned on drinking a bit more and I don't really drink, so I was her driver. When we left, she asked me who Christian was and I explained everything to her. And she told me that he sounded like a creep and then asked me if I wanted her to come over to my place and stay just in case. At first, I didn't think it was necessary, but after a bit of contemplation, I told her that it sounded like a good idea and that I would really appreciate it. I'm going to add a bit of a brief pause right there for the sake of anyone reading or listening to this. The next part of the story is the part that deserves the content warning. When we got to my apartment, and I unlocked and opened the door, and both myself and Michelle were surprised to see Christian sitting on my couch. Now, I know that a lot of these stories end with the ex standing there with a knife and attacking the person, but that's not actually how my story ended. Christian was sitting on my couch. He did have a knife, but he wasn't going to attack anyone. He had pretty clearly ended his own life right there. I was shocked, horrified, and I felt like I was going to throw up. Right there on my couch was my high school ex, a guy that I had just reconnected with and had to push back out of my life because he was being a creep, and he'd ended his own life in my apartment. I cannot overstate how traumatizing this was for me at that moment and every day since then. Obviously, we called the police, and when they and the medic showed up, they confirmed that he was beyond saving. I couldn't stay there after that. They had to treat it basically as a crime scene with what had happened, and I didn't want to stay there anyways. This was enough to get me out of my lease, thankfully, and I ended up moving in with Michelle in her apartment. I got rid of pretty much all my furniture as I couldn't bring myself to look at it and think about Christian. I've had nightmares about him since, about that whole moment opening my door, and to say that this whole thing has haunted me is an understatement. I'm not looking for pity, and I feel terrible for the fact that Christian felt that ending his own life was the best course of action. I'm just not really sure what else to say about all of it. Through all of this, coming to terms with the situation and moving my few things out, I did end up finding a note from Christian in my bedroom. He had placed it in the drawer of my nightstand. It was a simple note that just said, "Every mistake in my life has led me to this moment, and all I can say is that I'm sorry." It's not exactly closure, and not exactly something that helped me move on from it, and I don't know if I ever will get through it. This is a story that I never thought I'd have to tell. I'm Nina and I'm 28 years old, and several months ago, I found myself in a situation that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. I met Kevin when I was new to my company. He worked in the IT department while I worked in a different department on another floor. Our paths crossed when I had to get my company-issued laptop set up. Kevin was one of the ID guys responsible for onboarding new employees. He was charming, funny, and he made me feel at ease in a new environment. We hit it off almost immediately, and after a few casual conversations, he asked me out on a date. To be exact, we went out on 3 dates before deciding to make it official. I know how it sounds. Just know that I was lonely and it was hard for me to find a guy that I would like. So when I found Kevin, I didn't mind jumping into a relationship so quickly. The first couple of weeks were great. It was filled with the typical new relationship energy. However, it didn't take long for our differences to show. Well, 2 months exactly. Kevin and I had fundamental differences that we just couldn't work out. For one, he didn't like animals, which was a huge deal breaker for me. I have 2 dogs and 3 cats, and they are like family to me. At first, I just thought that Kevin wasn't used to animals, but his disdain for my pets was clear as day, and he often complained about the cost and attention that they required. Well, the final straw came one night when he casually suggested that I should consider giving them away or abandoning them, especially if we ever got serious and decided to get married. This was a conversation that he brought up 2 months into the relationship. Well, that was it for me. I couldn't be with someone who didn't love and respect my pets as I did. So, I ended it that same day. Looking back at it now, I'm actually glad that he showed his true colors so early into the relationship. Anyway, the breakup itself wasn't messy. There was no shouting matches or cruel words exchanged. Kevin did push back a bit, but ultimately he accepted. I also didn't worry about seeing him at work since we were on different floors and we rarely crossed paths. Life went back to normal after the breakup. I focused on my work, spent time with my pets, and then went out with friends. However, a couple of weeks later, I received a text message from Kevin. He asked me to meet him at a specific area of the park that we used to visit together. He said that he just wanted to talk. I didn't think much of it at that time. I figured that he might want to talk things over or ask to get back together. I wasn't interested in rekindling the relationship, but I thought that it would be kind to explain things to him in person, calmly and rationally. But as the date approached, I started to feel uneasy. I don't know why, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I might be in danger. Trusting my instincts, I called my older brother and explained the whole situation to him. Let me tell you about my brother. My brother is a tall, strong guy who is very active in sports and weightlifting. He's the kind of person who can intimidate most people with just his presence, but he's actually a caring and sweet man. My brother then suggested that he would go with me. He said that he will keep a bit of distance so we still have our privacy, but he wants to be able to keep an eye on me just in case that things go south. On the night of our meetup, my brother picked me up and we drove to the park. We were running late for some reason that I can clearly remember now. I told my brother the exact location, and he dropped me off near the spot while he went to find parking. I hurried to the bench where Kevin and I used to sit. But when I got there, Kevin wasn't around yet, so I just sat on the bench waiting for him. I noticed how eerily quiet and empty the park was. I never went to the park at that hour, so I never knew. But suddenly, I heard some rustling behind me. I turned around and I see three men emerging from the trees behind the bench. They had masks covering their mouths and they stared at me intensely. My heart sank and a wave of nausea hit me. It didn't take long to realize that this was a trap set up by Kevin. I started to panic, unsure of what to do, and the men closed in and I felt utterly helpless. And just then, I heard a booming voice yell, "Who the hell are you guys? Get the hell away from my sister!" It was my brother. He was running towards us, and the sight of his massive, intimidating frame must have freaked the men out. They hadn't expected anyone else to be there, let alone someone who could easily overpower them. They took off running, disappearing into the darkness. To be honest, in my panic state, I even forgot my brother was there. But I thank whatever stars I have that he was there and that I listened to my gut feeling a couple of days ago. I ran to my brother and then we got out of there as quickly as possible. My brother then drove me back home and we talked about what had happened. We debated calling the cops but ultimately decided against it, thinking that we didn't have enough proof that it was Kevin who orchestrated the whole thing. But deep down, I knew it was him. Looking back, I realized how foolish I was to meet him in the first place. But I had no idea that he was capable of something so horrible. A few days after the incident, I found out that Kevin had quit the company and no one knew where he was. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I was relieved but also scared, knowing that he was out there somewhere. I thank God for my brother, because I don't know what would have happened to me if he hadn't been there. I still get nightmares about that night, imagining what could have happened if my brother hadn't shown up in time. So, to everyone, all I can say is listen to that inner voice that tells you that something isn't right. I was just a sophomore in high school, and I fell head over heels for the new quiet kid, and thought that he was my forever. Crazy, but I would actually go on marrying down the road just 1 week after graduation. High school sweethearts. Looking back now, I can see how many red flags I noticed but ignored because I was young and eagerly wanting to be grown up. Well, fast forward, the night before my wedding day, I was going over last-minute wedding details with my mom, who is easily one of the most caring and selfless people that I know. So bless my sweet mama's heart when I asked her if she'd be mad if I decided that I didn't want to go through with the wedding. The wedding was the next day, but me being me, and Mom thought that I was messing with her, I couldn't tell her the truth of what was going on now. So I took a deep breath and I forced a believable chuckle. She genuinely thought that I was just pulling another one of my jokes. I went on to finally tell her the truth almost a year after I escaped him, and she still feels bad for not taking it seriously. No one knew what was going on behind closed doors, but makes sense. I was honestly his biggest PR team. Only 2 hours passed in saying I do's. He was throwing me out of the truck in my parents' driveway, cussing and yelling that he wanted a divorce. He was then recklessly driving off. So much for all that honeymoon phase on our actual honeymoon. I ran inside and my dad came out of the bedroom, and he couldn't understand a word that I was saying, but he is trying to basically ask me what was happening, and I say it as clear as I could while uncontrollably sobbing. He left me. How could he? On our honeymoon. My dad is pissed, but then he relaxed and tried to rationalize the situation, Like maybe he forgot something, or pulling a bad joke or something like that. And then we see his truck flying in our driveway, and my dad smiles and says, "See, he's right there." I wipe my tears and I walk out of the door and tell them yes, that it was a prank. But inside I was screaming. I was so embarrassed for myself because now I looked crazy. But if I wanted to save this relationship, they could never know the truth. Months go by and he starts being sweeter ever since we had to be in a long-distance relationship because he was in the military at training. But soon, I would be packing up my life and moving to Texas with him. I could tell that my parents were starting to see the cracks that I had worked so hard to glue together. My mom even picked up my phone on the table, mistaking it for hers, and saw this huge message from my ex, crying and begging me to stay because he was not a good person. But I assured her that this was way out of character for him, which was a lie, and that he was just lonely. I knew that she didn't believe me, but she also knew that I was stubborn and I was gonna do whatever regardless of her concerns. After just a few weeks in Texas, I knew my life was in danger. It was Thanksgiving that day, and my family just called to check up on us and just tell us happy Thanksgiving. And the moment that I hung up, the man that I thought was my soulmate just started cussing at me and saying that I need to stop talking to my family because he was my only family now. I let out a little chuckle thinking that he's gotta be joking. And then he picks up our wedding glasses, which I specifically had made for us, and then he throws it directly at me, shattering around me. Shocked, I didn't know what to do, so I walked over to the broom and I just start sweeping up the broken glass. You may read this and think, surely he would be done throwing a tantrum by now, right? But no. He then throws pictured frames at me while I'm sweeping up the glass. Honestly, that broken glass on the wooden floor was just a metaphor for any love that I had left towards this man. I broke that night, and I stopped seeing him as my other half, and more as the monster that I'm now stuck with. I became very depressed, and he loved that. He would break me down over and over again just to get a reaction. 2 months go by, and one night, he completely lost his shit over the washer and dryer people messing up the days that they were supposed to come out, and he started pacing back and forth, mumbling words that I couldn't quite make out. But then he demanded that I call and fix it. He grabbed me and sat me on the couch, telling me what to say and that I better not fuck it up, like a damn negotiation. This man was paranoid as hell, making comments that they were doing it because he was a soldier. And then he started blaming me, even though I wasn't even around him when he called the place in the first place. But he still yelled at me for hours. He walked to the bedroom, and I'm still on the couch still processing that moment. He said, "You're so stupid. This is all your fault. Did you plan this with the workers just to make me look dumb? Or are you really just that dumb? Huh? You bitch?" That's what I fucking thought. You're no good. You're just an ungrateful bitch. I said, "You know what? I'm done. You won't do anything except complain and bitch at me, blaming me for everything, and all you do is cuss and yell at me for no damn reason." He looked at me with this look that I've heard other victims try and describe, and the best that I can describe it is a darkness in his eyes, like an emptiness that still causes me nightmares to this day. And without hesitation, he lunges at me in the middle of the day with our curtains open, with our door wide open, and our neighbors out and about. He then throws me against the wall and starts choking me. I slowly see black, but then he lets go for a second because then he slammed my entire body to the floor. At that moment, I either blacked out or my brain was trying to shield myself from what was happening. But piece by piece, I would come to, and he was holding me by my shoulders and just repeatedly slamming me on the wooden floor. My screams ignored by the people outside, and I pleaded for anyone to call the police, and I repeated yelling for help over and over and over again. My fight or flight takes over and then chooses flight. I run to the main bathroom, and I lock the door, frantically calling my mom because I'm in that moment that I just wanted to hear her voice. Unsure if that would be my last. But my poor mom didn't know the nightmare of that phone call until it was too late. She was with my sister and dad, and then she put me on speakerphone because we usually do this so they can all talk to me like we were all there together. But instead, they hear me screaming for my life and hear my ex calling me awful names and telling me to get my ass in there and to unlock the door. They were so confused, and my dad was ready to come and kill this asshole himself. But then silence. No more banging, just me softly crying and just trying to calm my mother over the phone that I am all right and that I know that I need to leave him, but that I had to do it in the safest way possible because if he were to catch me, I may not make it out with my life. When I walk out of the room, my ex is just sitting there with a blank stare like nothing had happened. There was a theme throughout our 3-year relationship, but I could no longer ignore the escalation of his behavior. So one night, I finally put my escape plan into action. I was gonna make a run for it. It was 2 a.m. Keys to my Pontiac were on the kitchen table, and he was asleep in the bedroom that I wasn't allowed in several days earlier. I then busted out of the guest bedroom that was my prison, and then I beelined out the front door quietly, but also as quickly as possible. 9.5 hours to my home state, and I only stopped once in Dallas to fill up on gas. With every mile in my rearview mirror, I felt something inside that reassured me. I'm free now. Forever scared, but most have healed or faded. I 100% believe that if I have stayed, I would be 6 feet deep now. So, to my abusive ex-husband that I fled from that late February night, let's not meet again, ever. So my senior year of high school, I dated this guy. Let's call him Tom. We dated for over a year. The relationship was not good. We were always breaking up and then getting back together. We were fighting a lot, and he also threatened me a lot. It was just overall very toxic. His parents also had a very rocky relationship. His dad was an alcoholic and beat on his mom most nights. I even witnessed it when I spent the night there on rare occasions. It was scary. And toward the end of the senior year, Tom cheated on me at his birthday party. So again, we broke up, and months later we tried to get back together. But I just realized that I just didn't like him anymore, and I called it quits for good. That was 15 years ago, and that was the last time that I saw him. I've since heard that he became an alcoholic just like his dad, that he became very violent, and he wound up in a mental hospital. I wasn't sure on the details on this, but I had heard that he might be schizophrenic. 9 years ago, I met my now husband. We've been happily married for 4 years and have a 2-year-old and another one on the way. Maybe about a year ago now, I got a random text message asking my name. I get work calls and texts on my personal phone, so I just answered, "Yes?" And they wrote back, "How are you?" I should mention that I've had the same number since high school. I just didn't respond because I didn't know who it was, and at this point I figured that it wasn't something having to do with work. But then, a few minutes later, I got another text that said, "It's Tom. How are you?" When I tell you, I absolutely gasped. I responded, "I'm well, I hope you are too." He then wrote again and asked, "What are you doing?" Again, I didn't respond. A minute later, I get a follow-up message from him that said, "Do you ever think about us? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we were still together? Do you ever think about getting back together?" I sat in silence rereading these messages, unsure of how to respond. I finally just replied and said, "I'm sorry, Tom, but no, I'm married now, and I wish you the best, but I don't think we should have any form of communication." He just responded with okay and apologized. I thought that it was weird, but whatever. Maybe the dude was lonely and decided to reach out, but who knows. Last week, his mother showed up at my family business. I've worked here since high school in different roles. She and his father had gotten a divorce, and she now has a boyfriend that she seems happy with. We exchanged pleasantries, and then she asked me, "Did you hear about Tom? He was in an institution." I said that I'd heard and that I was sorry to hear it. She said, "Well, he killed several animals, and that's why they ended up locking him up." Again, I said that I was sorry to hear that, but then she said, "Yeah, but he's out now. He's been for a while. You know, you were always my favorite girlfriend he had. Do you ever still think about him?" I wasn't sure what to say to this. I wanted to say, "Lady, that was in high school. No." Instead, I just said, "No, I'm married now with a toddler. I don't have much time to think about anything else." I guess I was just trying to lighten the mood. But she then said, "You know, he's not a bad guy. I don't see him that much anymore, but when I do, he still talks about you. He wonders what could have been. Would you ever be open to talking to him?" Well, that's when I shut things down. I told her that it was great to see her, but that option was off the table now and forever. I then said that I had to get back to work, and I walked away and hid in the back until she left. I mean, what the actual fuck? This high school relationship was years ago. I want no part of him or his family. I'm just sincerely hoping that he doesn't pop up at my place of work. I have no idea if he's still around the area, but I really, really hope that he isn't. Anyway, bizarre old high school boyfriend, let's not meet again. Hi everyone, my name is Chris and I'm 25 and male. I'm here to tell you about a terrifying and somewhat embarrassing story that I have. Please forgive me if I write some things a bit weirdly. I'm really not the best when it comes to writing. Anyway, let's start the story. Falling in love with Samantha, who was 22 and female, was like a dream come true. We met at a mutual friend's party, and from that night on, it felt like we were inseparable. She was everything that I have ever wanted. She was kind, thoughtful, and beautiful. Our relationship was the epitome of what you would call healthy and beautiful. We took care of each other, we shared our dreams, and we made plans for the future. After dating for a year, we decided to take the next step and then move in together. I know, some of you might think that it was too fast, but for me, I couldn't wait to just be with her all the time. Those first few months were nothing short of magical. We did everything as a couple, cooking meals together, we had weekend getaways, and we were cuddling up for movie nights. We spent lazy Sundays in our jammies. We were playing board games and, just enjoying each other's company. It really felt like a perfect match. Like everything had just fallen into place. It felt like I have finally met the one that I was going to spend the rest of my life with. But as time went on, something shifted. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone had flipped a switch. By the 7th month of living together, the dynamic between us had completely changed. We stopped caring about each other in the way that we used to. Where there had been once love and affection, there was now apathy and irritation. It happened so suddenly that it was jarring. We started getting annoyed with each other's presence, snapping at the smallest things. I couldn't stand the way she left her shoes in the hallway, and she hated the way that I absent-mindedly left dishes in the sink. Our once cozy home turned into a battleground, if I may say, and every little annoyance became a reason for a screaming match between the two of us. Intimacy completely vanished. We went from being a couple who couldn't keep their hands off each other to barely acknowledging each other's presence. There were days when we wouldn't even speak to each other at all. The silence between us was just heavy and suffocating. I don't know why we stayed together despite the obvious signs that it was over. Maybe it was just because neither of us knew how to end it. Or maybe it was the looming specter of our lease that had just a couple of months left. We were both just waiting it out, I guess, hoping to avoid the discomfort of a breakup until the lease was up. But everything came to a head one day when we fought over something as trivial as dishes in the sink. The argument escalated quickly, and we started another screaming match with each other. And in the heat of the moment, I thought to myself, "Oh God, I hate this woman." And that was when it clicked for me. I couldn't continue being in a relationship where I harbored these kinds of thoughts. I told her that we should end it, and she agreed. We decided to just wait for the lease to be up, but I already moved my stuff to the spare bedroom that night. We hadn't spoken a word for a week after that. Living in the same space with someone you once loved but now couldn't stand was a new kind of torture. One day, I was feeling bored and somewhat lonely, so I decided to download a dating app. I was already single. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just some people to chat with. I matched with a few women and I started talking to them. But there was this one girl that I really connected with. We hit it off and we decided to take our conversation out of the app. We exchanged numbers and started talking on the phone, sometimes for hours. It was refreshing to have a friendly voice to talk to, a distraction from the tense atmosphere that I had at home. Do take note that during my relationship with Samantha, I have never cheated on her, nor did I ever think that she cheated on me. This all happened weeks after me and Samantha finally called quits on the relationship. One night, while I was on the phone with the new girl in my room, I heard a loud banging on my door. It startled me. It wasn't a normal kind of banging. It sounded like someone was using a heavy object to hit the door. So I ended the call abruptly. And then came the yelling. It was Samantha. She was screaming and calling me names. She accused me of cheating on her, her voice filled with rage and hysteria. The noise was deafening. I could hear things breaking outside my door, glass shattering, objects crashing to the floor. And despite being a man, I knew that I didn't have the strength to stop Samantha in her state. I was just horrified. I genuinely thought that I was going to get hurt that night. So I did the only logical thing that I could think of, and that was to call the police. They arrived within minutes, thanks to a neighbor who had already called them after hearing the commotion. The neighbors actually called in for a noise complaint. The officers came in and then detained Samantha until she calmed down. Two officers spoke to her while one talked to me, and I explained everything, my voice shaking as I recounted the ordeal. To be honest, in my head, I was terrified that Samantha would make up lies and blame everything on me, but luckily she didn't. After everything was sorted out, I decided to just leave that night. The police waited while I packed my things and I loaded everything into my car. As I drove away, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I stopped by a gas station to buy some snacks and I called my parents to explain what had happened. They were understanding and offered to let me move back in with them. I then blocked Samantha on all my social media accounts and I changed my phone number. Thankfully, she didn't try to contact me again. The entire experience left me shaken, and I just knew that I wouldn't be dating anyone anytime soon. So, to Samantha, the woman that I once loved, who turned my life into a nightmare, I hope that I never see you again. The creepy guy I dated for a while is a murderer. As a teenager, I waited tables in a local restaurant to pay for the gas for my car. That's where I met Mr. Creep, let's call him that. In my naive mind, he seemed normal at first, despite the fact that he was 20 and wanting to date a 17-year-old. Leaving my job after dark scared me, so I taught myself to get in my car, shut the door, and lock it in one fluid motion, and it made me feel safe. One night, while I was leaving work, I had just gotten into my car when Mr. Creep seemed to just appear out of nowhere, yanking my door handle to try and open it. I looked into his eyes in the split second before he smiled, and what I saw absolutely chilled my bones. I don't know how to describe the evil that I saw. I just rolled down the window a crack and then faked a laugh when he said something about wanting to see if he could scare me, and then I just used my curfew as an excuse to get away. From then on, I was terrified of him, but I didn't let on because I was afraid of what he might do if I told him that I never wanted to see him again. After this, he constantly lied to try to impress me and try to invent ways of being alone with me, but my instinct was to run, so I tried my best to avoid him. About 2 weeks after this incident, the restaurant got robbed, and there was significant evidence against Mr. Creep, but it was just not the kind that allowed the cops to charge him. I tried sending all of my text conversations with Mr. Creep to the police chief in hopes that it would help. But Mr. Creep just slithered away after that, and I always had to look over my shoulder. About 5 years ago, he messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. He went on about his top secret military clearance, as well as a huge acreage he owned. It made me nervous, and I felt like he was trying to spring a trap or something, but I tried to put it out of my mind. And then today, I was looking at posts about an unsolved murder when I saw his mugshot. He is now facing murder charges as well as 2 other violent felony charges. I am so glad to know that he's locked up now, but I am so overwhelmed about how correct my instincts were about Mr. Creep. I feel like I escaped him. My name is Matthew, and I'm 30 years old. I met Kimberly when I was 26. We were introduced through a mutual friend, Richard, who had been my best friend since college. Kimberly and I had an instant connection, the kind that you read about in novels. We were that couple who finished each other's sentences and shared inside jokes that made others feel like outsiders. It was even so cheesy to the point where I can't even believe it. Richard, who was also 26 at that time, was incredibly supportive of our relationship. He seemed genuinely happy for us, often joining us for outings and gatherings, and I valued his friendship deeply. He was like a brother to me. For a long time, it felt like I was living in a dream. Kimberly, Richard, and I formed a close-knit trio. We spent countless weekends together, hiking, dining out, and even vacationing as a group. My life literally felt perfect. But perfect never lasts, and I was too blinded by love to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. The first signs of trouble were small, almost insignificant. Kimberly started making quirky comments about how Richard and I had such a strong friendship. She would say things like, "You two are practically inseparable," with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At that time, I thought she was just being playful. But these comments became more frequent, and gradually, they took on a more critical tone. She started suggesting that Richard didn't respect our relationship and that he was a bad influence on me. I brushed off her concerns, thinking that she was just being overly protective. Richard had been my friend for years, and I couldn't imagine him having any ill intentions. But Kimberly's words planted a seed of doubt in my mind. I began to analyze Richard's actions more critically, looking for any signs of disrespect or betrayal. And this was just the beginning of a manipulation that I didn't yet recognize. It wasn't long before Kimberly's influence began to affect my behavior. I started declining Richard's invitations to hang out, choosing instead to spend time with Kimberly alone. She would often claim that she felt uncomfortable when Richard was around, saying that he made her feel like a third wheel. I wanted to make her happy, so I distanced myself from Richard, thinking that it was the right thing to do for my relationship. Months passed, and my social circle began to shrink. Friends who had once been close seemed distant, wary even. Kimberly always had an explanation, though. She would tell me that they were jealous of our relationship or that they had said things behind my back. I trusted her completely, and I took her words at face value. Confronting my friend seemed unnecessary. After all, Kimberly was the woman that I loved. As my friendships deteriorated, my dependence on Kimberly increased. She became my entire world, the only person that I felt that I could trust. But as our relationship deepened, so did the manipulation. She started questioning my memory, insisting that I had said or done things that I couldn't recall. Simple disagreements turned into elaborate blame games, with her always emerging as the victim. I seriously began to doubt my own sanity, relying on her perception of events rather than my own. Richard tried to intervene a few times, expressing concern about my relationship with Kimberly. But his words fell on deaf ears. I saw his attempts as meddling, convinced by Kimberly that he was trying to sabotage our happiness. My once close friend became a stranger to me, someone that I viewed with suspicion and resentment. The isolation was complete when Kimberly suggested that we move in together. She painted a picture of a perfect life, just the two of us, free from the negativity of others. I, of course, agreed, thinking that it would strengthen our relationship and bring us closer. But moving in only magnified the problems. Kimberly's control over my life became more apparent. She monitored my activities, questioned my interactions, and she criticized my own decisions. I felt trapped, but I couldn't see a way out. One day, while I was cleaning a drawer of mine, I found a group photo from a few years back. It was taken during one of our outings with Richard and a few other friends. Looking at that photo, I felt sad. I realized how much I missed my friends and the carefree times that we had shared. It was a moment of clarity, just a brief escape from the fog of manipulation that had clouded my mind. so I secretly decided to reach out to Richard. It was a hesitant, tentative step, driven by a longing for the friendship that we once had. I wasn't sure if Richard was going to accept me, given all the things that I have done to him. But to my surprise, he was receptive. He listened without judgment as I poured out my confusion and my doubts. He assured me that he had never said anything against me and that he had always wanted the best for me. His words were like a balm to my wounded soul, but they also amplified the realization of how much that I had lost. As I rekindled my friendship with Richard, Kimberly's behavior became more erratic. She sensed a change in my behavior and intensified her efforts to control me. The arguments escalated and her accusations became more severe. It was a really difficult time for me, but with Richard's support, I began to see the manipulation for what it was, and I started standing up for myself, questioning Kimberly's narratives and asserting myself. The breaking point came was when Kimberly learned that I reconnected with Richard, and then she accused Richard of trying to seduce her. It was an outrageous claim, one that shattered the final remnants of my trust in her. I confronted her for the first time, truly challenging her manipulations. Her facade crumbled, revealing the extent of her lies. The confrontation was messy and painful. Kimberly tried to turn the tables, playing the victim and accusing me of betraying her. But I was no longer blinded by her manipulation. I really did love Kimberly. But I found the strength to end the toxic relationship. It was difficult, one that left me feeling both free and heartbroken. The weeks that followed were a period of healing and self-discovery. Richard stood by me, helping me rebuild my life and reconnect with old friends. It was a slow process, and it was filled with a lot of moments of doubt and insecurity. My relationship with Richard grew stronger. He never once said, "I told you so." Instead, he supported me with unwavering loyalty and understanding. My other friendships gradually mended too, as people saw that I was working on my life and distancing myself from the toxic relationship. Looking back, I realized how easily I had fallen into the trap that Kimberly had set up for me. It was a humbling experience, one that taught me the importance of self-awareness and putting up healthy boundaries. Eventually, I moved to a new city. Of course, Richard and I and our other friends stayed in touch. Years passed, and I met someone new. This time, I approached the relationship with caution and self-awareness, mindful of the lessons that I had learned. And I could feel that this time, it was a healthy and genuine connection. No manipulation, no lies, and I felt a sense of peace. As I reflect on the past, I am grateful for the support of friends like Richard. Kimberly's manipulation had been a dark chapter in my life, but it doesn't define me. So, to Kimberly, I hope one day you reflect on yourself, maybe get some therapy if you think you need it. And to the others, thank you for reading this, but I just want to remind you to not throw away your friendship so easily, like I did. Life has a funny way of pushing you to your limits. And when I decided to move to a new city after a particularly ugly breakup, I thought that I was making a fresh start. Little did I know that the past has a way of creeping back into your life, no matter how far you run. I'm Lyra. I'm 27 and female. The relationship I had has been a roller coaster, filled with highs that made me feel invincible and lows that left me questioning my sanity. When it finally ended, it wasn't mutual. It was messy, complicated, and filled with accusations and regrets. My ex, Mark, 28 and male, wasn't willing to let things go easily. The months following our breakup were filled with incessant calls, a lot of messages, and unexpected visits. I realized that I needed to create some distance from him and regain control over my life. It was just getting too toxic for me, and it was messing with my mental health. So, moving to a new city seemed like the best solution. I found a cozy one-bedroom apartment in a bustling neighborhood, complete with friendly neighbors and a sense of anonymity that was very refreshing. It has been a stressful couple of months, but the move was cathartic. It was a way to reclaim my life and my independence. For the first few months, everything was perfect. I found a new job, I made new friends, and for the first time in a long time, I finally felt like I was at peace. But then, it started very subtly. At first, I didn't think much of the small changes in my apartment. I'm naturally forgetful, so when I found my favorite coffee mug in a different cupboard or my keys on the kitchen counter instead of the hallway table, I chalked it up to my scatterbrained nature. But as time went on, these little inconsistencies became harder to ignore. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find my living room window slightly ajar. I distinctly remember closing it that morning, as the weather forecast said that it was going to rain. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I dismissed it as my imagination just playing tricks on me. Maybe I had left it open and simply forgotten about it, and just thought that I closed it. But then, there were the messages. Mark had stopped trying to contact me directly after I moved, which was a relief. But I began receiving anonymous texts from an unknown number. Initially, they were innocuous, just generic greetings and questions about my day. But they quickly turned invasive. The sender seemed to know too much about my daily routine, my new friends, even the layout of my apartment. I blocked the number, but the messages continued from different numbers, almost as if the sender had unlimited resources to keep reaching out to me. It was really freaking me out. I started feeling watched. It was an unsettling sensation, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I don't know if you've tried that before, but in my opinion, it's a horrible feeling. Every time that I would walk home from work, I would glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. But there was never anyone there. It was just the city life, strangers going about their business, not knowing about my paranoia. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On my nightstand, next to my favorite book, was an old photo of Mark and me. It was from the happier times. It was a picture that I had torn up and thrown away before I moved. Seeing it there, perfectly intact, felt like a violation. It was a clear message. Mark had found me, and he had been in my apartment. I'm not stupid, so I went to the police directly with the photo and the couple text messages that I haven't erased yet. But with no concrete evidence to prove that it was Mark, there was little that they could do. So I tried doing the logical step. I changed my locks, I hired a locksmith, and I felt a brief sense of security. But the feeling was short-lived. The next time that I came home, I found another photo. This one of me sleeping, taken from the inside of my apartment. The realization that Mark had a key, again, to my new place despite the lock change was terrifying. I didn't understand how he could do this. Every creak of my old apartment now felt like a potential threat to me. I started sleeping with a chair wedged against the bedroom door. My phone was always clutched tightly in my hand. My friends even noticed the change in me. They were asking me all the time if everything was all right, but I was somewhat too embarrassed to admit the truth. So I just kept it to myself. It just felt like if I admit it out loud, then it made everything too real. And part of me wanted to believe that it was all in my head, that maybe I'm just too paranoid, or maybe I'm just going crazy. The tension reached its peak one rainy night when I had just settled into bed, the sound of the rain pattering against the window like a soothing backdrop. When I heard it, a faint click. It was the sound of my front door opening. I almost didn't hear it because of the rain, but I think I was just hyper aware all the time, and that's why I was able to catch that sound. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear. My breath caught in my throat. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, and they made their way down the hallway. I knew it was Mark. I mean, who else could it be? The intruder moved, like they know the exact layout of my apartment, like they've been there multiple times before. It was great that I already had my phone on me, so with trembling hands, I dialed 911 and I whispered my situation to the operator. I could hear the intruder moving closer. I stayed as quiet as possible, praying that the police would arrive in time. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. The handle turned, but the chair wedged against it held firm. There was a moment of silence followed by a frustrated grunt. The intruder tried the handle again, shaking the door violently. And a couple of minutes later, I heard it. The sounds of the sirens in the distance was the most beautiful thing that I have ever heard. In that moment, the intruder must have heard them too, because the door handle stopped rattling and I heard hurried footsteps retreating. By the time the police arrived, the apartment was empty and the front door stood open, rainwater pooling on that welcome mat. The police found no trace of the intruder and no signs of forced entry. They took my statement and promised to patrol the area more frequently, and they just told me to call them back if something happens. But I knew that wasn't enough. Mark was so determined, and as long as he knew where I lived, I would never be safe. So, I chose the hard route. I decided to move again. This time, without telling anyone except my immediate family. I found a new apartment in a different part of the city, and I changed my phone number. And I deactivated all my social media accounts. The process was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. I was being drained from everything that was happening to me, and I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless. For a while, things seemed to improve. The messages stopped, and there were no more signs of Mark's presence. So I kind of started to relax, letting my guard down, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again. But then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I received a package. It was simple, a small brown box with no return address. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was a single item. Another photo of me sleeping, taken from the inside of my new apartment. Panic just washed over me, and I just fell down on the floor and started bawling my eyes. Despite all my efforts, Mark had found me again. I realized then that I couldn't keep running. Mark's obsession had become a dangerous game of cat and mouse, one that I was tired of playing. I didn't want to do this anymore. So I contacted the police again, this time providing them with every piece of evidence that I had collected, the photos, the messages, everything. They took my case more seriously, assigning an officer to check on me regularly. Days passed, and I haven't heard anything from Mark. The days turned into weeks, and while I remained on edge, there were no further signs. The serious police presence seemed to deter him. Perhaps he had finally realized that his behavior would land him in serious trouble. I also don't know why I didn't think of this before, but one good friend of mine suggested putting cameras all over the place, in the front door, inside my apartment, just to make sure that if he ever comes inside again, I can catch proof of him and I can finally have evidence to use against him. But months passed without incident. I started going to therapy. My therapist helped me understand that Mark's actions were not my fault and that I deserved to live without fear. I think going to therapy was really helpful. I made new friends, I reconnected with the old ones, and I even started dating again. Each step felt like a victory. Yet, in the back of my mind, there was always a shadow of doubt, a lingering fear that Mark would suddenly resurface again. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I noticed a man standing across the street, partially concealed by the shadows. But when I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't Mark. It was just a stranger, someone who had no interest in me. The realization was a small victory, a reminder that not every shadow held a threat against me. As time went on, the fear slowly went away and I learned to trust again, to let people into my life without the constant worry of betrayal. I still took precautions, of course, changing my locks regularly, being mindful of my surroundings, having cameras around my house, but I no longer let the fear control me. Years passed and I finally built a life for me. I got married, I have children now, and I found a career that I am passionate about. This happened years ago, and the only reason why I'm writing about this now is because the other day, I received a letter. An old friend passed it to me and said that it was from Mark. It was handwritten, and it was filled with apologies and explanations. He claimed to have changed, to have found redemption and a new purpose in life. He begged for my forgiveness, hoping to close the chapter on his own terms. I read the letter once, then twice, and finally, I just tore it up and threw it away. Mark had taken enough from me. He didn't deserve my forgiveness or my time. I had moved on, and I wasn't about to let him back into my life even in the smallest way. So, to Mark, my crazy ex-boyfriend, who haunted my life for so long, I hope we would never meet again. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.